But how many men's stories and women's stories are we not hearing? And mostly because I will tell you, like me, it was very hard for me to talk about myself. I love to talk about all these other great stories, right? But when we ask women to add their stories into our national database so they live on, where we say, claim your rightful place in history, they're like, I was just doing my job. Every person in the military was just doing their job. They were taking care of their person on their right and their left, taking care of others, which is what that sense of service is all about. So, but I really do think that these stories have got to be trumpeted and triumphed. And that's why I love that this film is coming out with Tyler Perry and Netflix. So we're really proud of that. But how many more stories, to your point, are languishing on the cutting room floor? Or somebody said, well, I was just you fill in the blank, whatever profession they were. I was only, and I'm over it, men and women alike.
All right, guys, welcome back to a brand new episode of the Hart Hustle Podcast. Today, I'm sitting across this digital table with an amazing leader. I'm sitting across from Phyllis Wilson, the president of Military Women's Memorial Foundation. Now, today's conversation is going to be one about how sometimes we're challenged in a common setting that changes the trajectory of our lives. The amount of effort that it takes to change narratives, especially when it comes to the role that women play in our military, but also the amazing work that Phyllis has dedicated her life to in serving our country and also serving so many individuals as well. Phyllis, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited for this one.
So the way in which we're going to start off today's conversation is by posing a simple question, or at least you were posed a question, or at least a challenge. Someone at one point in time said, you shouldn't be parking in that parking spot, and challenged you. And that had a change of trajectory in your life. Can you take us back to that day in which you were challenged in the parking lot and what that meant to you?
Sure. I had served in the United States Army, jumped out of airplanes, did all kinds of what I thought was cool stuff for 37 years. And I normally park way out in parking lots. One, I don't like anybody dinging my car. And two, I normally wear a Fitbit. So I like to get as many steps as possible. One day on the way to work, I was charged with picking up cupcakes or something for some party at work. And I was running late, which is not common for us in the military, but I was that day. I'm going to blame it on traffic. But I grabbed a veteran parking space near the entryway into the grocery store, and I hop out, and instantly a gentleman challenges me, hollers from across the parking lot at that, excuse me, that's veteran parking. I said, yes, sir, I know. And I just kept walking, and he's like, excuse me, is your husband with you? And okay, now I'm going to stop for a second. And I said, by myself, and I am a veteran. Then it went down this rabbit hole asking me, when did I serve? Where did I serve? What branch of service? And the questions he asked made me quite aware that he knew a lot more than the average joker on the street about the military. So I said, you know what, sir, I believe you must have served, and I want to thank you for your service. And he kind of nodded, but he did not say, right back at you or kiss my butt, nothing. And just sort of turned and so I went on into the grocery store. And as I was doing that, I thought, you know what, if I had been a man that had never served, but had the audacity to park in a veteran spot and got out, I don't think that guy would have said anything, because really, what are we supposed to look like as veterans? Apparently I didn't look like the right mix, but I thought any other guy, served or not, I don't think he would have challenged him. And as I said, having served for 37 years, I had become aware of this place that late in my career about the Military Women's Memorial, and that it was honoring and telling the stories of more than 3 million women that have defended this country. And I just, that's crazy talk. How many more of us have to serve before we park, without somebody challenging us in a veteran parking space? And as fate would have it, they were actually doing a national search for their next president of the foundation that operated that memorial. And I decided I wasn't angry with him, just ruffled enough to say, okay, Obviously, we're not on equal par yet. So I dusted off the resume, and now more than 5 years later, here I am. So if that gentleman recalls challenging somebody in Northern Virginia in a veteran parking space, I want to tell him, thank you. Had you not done that, I would not have the dream job, the best job that I've ever had in my entire life, because I wouldn't have applied. I was happy doing the job that I had at the time. I didn't know how contented one could truly be with a job, but that it took that kind of a spark to change my trajectory.
I think it's a beautiful story, but also kind of underlies the difference that people think about when you say you're a soldier or you're a female soldier. We talked about this in our previous conversation. You're a soldier who served for 37 years. And to have somebody in that moment challenge you and say, that's veteran parking, you say, yes, sir, I know. And then come on to a second question, when did you serve? You should have also said, I also have 4 sons, right, who are also serving in the military as well. So if you want to talk to a military family, you got me. It's a really interesting dynamic that some people feel it's necessary to challenge others when it comes to serving our country and even parking in a veteran spot. That's so interesting to me.
Yeah, and I'm not alone in that. I tell this story fairly frequently, actually. And in audiences with a lot of women veterans, they're all nodding their head. And after the fact, they have to come up and share their happened to me as well story. I've even at one event, we had almost 1,000 women in the room. And I asked them by a show of hands, has that ever happened to you? And hundreds of hands went up, not 50%, but still 200-300 women raised their hands that had occurred. I love it. I purposely now park in veterans parking just in the hope somebody will say something about it. And it's my opportunity to tell them about the more than 3 million of us that have gladly put our lives on the line too, to defend this country that we love. And we would love for that to become, or when we get out of our vehicle in a veteran parking spot, or if we have a t-shirt on or a hat that mentions something about the military, that they just don't default that whatever man I'm standing next to, oh, that's him. It might be us too.
So 37 years served. I want to ask a little bit about kind of your origin story. Who was Phyllis as a younger girl and woman? What kind of things were inspiring her, and why did she choose to go into the military specifically?
Yeah, so my dad was born and raised, horse and buggy Amish. So nobody in that community serves in the military. They're conscientious objectors. And during wartime, many of my uncles and even first cousins, they served in hospitals. The men served in hospitals stateside for 2 years, and that was their service that they gave. But they were never considered veterans, and they had no status whatsoever. But in lieu of going overseas, this is what they did. So nobody in my family that I knew of had ever served in the military, and nobody in my family had ever gone to university, to college. So that also was an unknown piece. And I decided I wanted to become a doctor, but nobody said, that's 8 years of college. You just don't know what you don't know, but it sounded great. Like I had seen Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman on television or things like that. And I'm like, well, that's what I want to do. So I grew up as a tomboy. My brothers and I, we were always outside. It was the generation that was sent outside all the time. There were no gaming devices. There was no anything. We had board games, but they made us bored. And so we were outside playing. And along the way, I decided after I graduated from high school that I was going to go to college, but I was working 2 part-time jobs to pay for part-time community college. And after 2 years of that, I'm like, this is going to take forever. And I heard a commercial on the radio from the Army about be all that you can be. And I said, well, what the heck? And I heard they had college money. So I'm like, let me go check it out. So a 4-year commitment would get me more than enough college money to complete at least a 4-year degree. And I could also learn a language. And in this case, it was German, which my dad and all of his siblings and my grandparents all spoke a version of German and Pennsylvania Dutch. And I hated not having a clue what they were saying. So the opportunity to learn a language was just icing on the cake. And then I was in. I thought I'd do 4 years and be out. And then 37 years later, I'm out. But so many people I've met that served in the military, I haven't met anybody that said, oh, yeah, I came in so I could do at least 20 years. No, we all came in for college or to do a stint, to get our head on straight, whatever it is. But we met people that so inspired us. We wanted to stay and continue working with them.
That time from that 4-year commitment to go to college, but also to learn a language, right, turned into 37 years. What were some of the big lessons that you learned along that 37 years of growth in your maturity, in leadership? What were some of the core staples that you think were imprinted on you in that time?
You know what I love about the military is that they throw you into a leadership role almost immediately. You know, you're like a squad leader, you have some other group of people you're responsible for. Hell, you're in a part in your life where you're not even doing a great job of taking care of yourself. But I think that the value in that, especially as a young person, is that things that you won't do for yourself, you will do for somebody else. And if that meant that you had to keep track of 4, 5, 6 other people, well, that meant you had to be there a few minutes before they did to take care and make sure that they were all squared away. So it taught you leadership in a way that you didn't even realize that what they were teaching you. You just knew you weren't going to get somebody chewing your backside off. You know, the drill sergeant scared the daylights out of us in a good way. So I think along the way, learning incrementally, only being responsible for first yourself and then a few people and then a group of 20 or 30 people and then ultimately 125 people and then hundreds of people. And it keeps growing. And over time, you don't even realize that you've built this skill set that the Army has forced you to acquire. And now it's become second nature. You just automatically do it. It's just like anything else in muscle memory, whether it truly is running your 2 miles or further, or firing a weapon, cleaning a weapon, jumping out of an airplane. All of those, they train you so many times, so many repetitions of the same thing until no matter what the situation, bullets flying, bad things happening, you know in your heart of hearts, you know exactly what to do. Yeah, your hands might be shaking a little bit, but you're going to do exactly what you've been trained hundreds of times to do the one time that it really counts.
Did you ever think that your process of entering into the military, which led to an extensive career, was also going to be the beginning of kind of starting your family narrative of being able to join the military as well? 4 sons who were enlisted and part of the military. I mean, that's an amazing legacy to start. Do you ever get time to reflect on that, or was that part of your big plan, or that just happened naturally?
You know, it just kind of happened. They say that the military is becoming more and more a family business, you know, because a lot of people that know nothing about it, it seems a little scary, eerie, I suppose. You don't really know. You understand, you know, there is a chance you may die, yes. But police, firefighters, there's all kinds of jobs and professions that they're rather dangerous. But I think the goodness is in the military, I mean, we are trained and trained and trained almost until you're so tired of being trained. It's like, can we just do something else? But there's a rationale behind all of what they do. And it does bring nearly all of us back home. And that's important. But war is, by inherent need, incredibly dangerous. And that's why you hope we never actually have to go to war, but human nature is such that we do. Now, as far as thinking about my children, of course, I was married to another military person, and we just, I guess I really thought that along the way, seeing the absences that we were gone for days, weeks, months from home, that I didn't really think any of our children would decide that that was something that they would also want to emulate and follow in our footsteps, as it were. Immensely proud that they are. And then they all joined after 9/11. So they knew that they were very likely going to serve in a combat zone, and they all have. At times when I was also in the same combat zone as they. So that's a little different. It's one thing to go yourself. It's another when somebody you care that deeply for is also or is in a combat zone. Then the worry changes differently. And while some people would challenge me here stateside and said, how can you stand that? Why didn't you stop your sons from joining? And I said, Why would I stop them? Yeah, I'm serving. Why would I tell them this isn't right for them? It isn't right for everybody, but it was right for all of them, whether for a chapter or a career. Some people, this is the need. And they said, what if they die? And I said, what if they do? They could wrap their motorcycle or a car around a tree in, you name the state in this United States. And to what end? Or they could be defending our nation, doing what they believe is right. They were all adults when they made that decision, just like I was. And they chose to serve. And I'm very proud that that's what they've chosen to do. Now, will any of my grandchildren, I have 16 of them, let's see if any of them opt to do that. But at this point, not yet.
I think it's an amazing story about setting an example to serve a purpose higher than yourself, right? And when the time and the opportunity comes, naturally, we're going to take advantage of that because we had a father and a mother who showed us the right way in order to kind of put ourselves in a secondary position to serve other people. And that's a beautiful message that, I mean, kind of encompasses the version of servitude, but also the family morals, right? Of doing what is right in a time of need. And I feel like you should be incredibly proud of that.
And I am. And I did become a registered nurse on the civilian side, as well as having served as an intelligence analyst in the military. And then some of my family, my children that did not serve in the military are, another one is a registered nurse. She works as an organ transplant RN. Another one is a master's prepared school teacher. And right now, because she has 4 babies, they are at home. Yeah, 4. And she has decided she's going to be a homeschool mom for the next several years while she really gets these kids set in they're all avid readers, everything that you would expect a school teacher to want of their own children. She's going to make sure that they are well set for success, because reading is, we all know that if you can't read well, you can't really, it's just an extra barrier to success that doesn't need to be added for when she can be there and teach them as she is.
I mean, so many levels and layers of inspiration and servitude here, and doing the right thing are so incredible. I want to ask you a little bit of a different type of question. When you start leading this organization, right, you recognize there are so many stories of women who have come before you that maybe inspired you. Do you have any examples of just stories that kind of gave you this chills in recognizing the servitude of amazing women that came before you? What was that like?
I will tell you that I was a voracious reader all my life. Oh, loved to read, even as a small child. Curl myself up in a room chair. Nobody would even find me because I was real small as a kid, and I'd be tucked it back in a chair or the corner of a couch, and people would just keep walking right past and wondering where I was. But I think, sadly, in the 37 years that I served, I did not hear many military women's stories. And so the memorial that I now lead it opened in 1997, and 16 years after it opened is the first time I ever learned about it. So it'd been open and collecting all of and curating these stories and artifacts. It's like a walk-through museum, starting with the Revolutionary War, when women disguised themselves as men, fought and died on the battlefield. The Civil War, likewise, and all the way in 1901, women were finally permitted through the Army Nurse Corps to be actually in the military, but they weren't called by any rank. They were only called Miss or Nurse, and that held true for quite a while. I didn't know these stories, though, the whole time I was in the Army. It was only after I started working here, and some of our longer tenured staff have taken me under their wings and just regurgitate so much these incredible stories that how did I not know them? And I'm honestly a little frustrated that America, men and women, boys and girls, don't know some of these incredible stories, because I think I was a pretty good soldier. I could have been an even better soldier had I known the trials, the tribulations, the service, and the sacrifice that these men and these women made generations before I came to be. That I feel like I owe it to them now to make sure their stories are being told. One key story that everybody can watch on Netflix in just about a month is the story of Lieutenant Colonel Charity Adams Early. Tyler Perry is making a Netflix film about her unit that she led in World War II. This is a Black woman leading an almost all Black unit of 855 women to Europe in World War II. Only women's group like it. And Kerry Washington portrays the commanding officer, Charity Adams, and Oprah Winfrey and others are in this Tyler Perry made film. Netflix, December 20th. And the crazy thing about this is she was in the same army I served in for 37 years. Charity Adams served in World War II. I never once in 37 years ever heard that name. Never.
Wow.
And that's kind of frustrating because the Congressional Gold Medal a couple of years ago was awarded to this incredible unit for what they did in World War II. Kind of amazing. Now, some of you may have heard of Grace Hopper. She was an admiral in the United States Navy ultimately. She created one of the early computer languages called COBOL. And she is responsible for coining the phrase when you have a problem with your computer and you say there's a bug in the computer. The reason that stuck is because of Grace Hopper. She was working on computers back in the 1940s and 50s, and one of the computers stopped working. They took it apart. There was a real bug inside of it that was keeping it from working. So afterwards, whenever something went wrong with one of the computers, Grace would say, it's got a bug in it. And that's where that came to be. So does that make sense?
This is incredible.
Yeah.
That makes amazing sense. And I just think about how many, if you're sharing these stories about systems like computers that we engage with every single day and use common vernacular and language like a bug in the system, these came from origin stories that were based around women. So how many other stories don't we know, Phyllis?
Oh, I can't even imagine. Like I said, there's more than 3 million of us that have served and are serving now, which they can all put their personal stories into our national database. And we have almost 320,000 of these stories, like Grace Hopper's and Charity Adams. We have their stories and so many more. Incredible, incredible stories. Shoshana Johnson, the only Black woman in American history to be a prisoner of war. Shoshana was just at the memorial, but 20 years ago, she was taken as a prisoner of war by the Iraqis. And her story is in there. It's just incredible. I mean, she's hiding under her vehicle, still gets shot through both legs, is held as a POW for 20 some days until she's rescued. I cannot imagine what the terror must have been like. You know, imagine one day being hiding away and hoping the bad guys don't find you. Well, they found her. And so there she was for 20 some days until our people were able to get there and rescue her. Incredible stories of courage, of service to this country, of grace under fire. And those that before we were allowed to be anywhere near the combat zones, incredible stories of what women doing what the country allowed them to do, because by law we were precluded from pretty much everything. Men have always been required to serve in the military. Women had to fight to be allowed to do it.
I feel like this is an amazing opportunity for me to ask a question. 37 years of service. Use the example of this amazing individual who served in the same army that you did, but you never heard her story. So what type of stories are being told to soldiers, both male and female, to get them inspired, if not these ones?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I remember certainly in the military hearing about, in the good old days, you know, Sergeant Audie Murphy, amazing, you know, Medal of Honor recipient, World War II, Sergeant York, World War I, and then all of the folks that have served, certainly in Vietnam, the first Gulf War, Iraq and Afghanistan, our servicemen and women that laid down their lives. Look at Pat Tillman and other stories, people that we know. But how many men's stories and women's stories are we not hearing? And mostly because I will tell you, like me, it was very hard for me to talk about myself. I love to talk about all these other great stories, right? But when we ask women to add their stories into our national database so they live on, where we say, claim your rightful place in history, they're like, I was just doing my job. Every person in the military was just doing their job. They were taking care of their person on their right and their left, taking care of others, which is what that sense of service is all about. So, but I really do think that these stories have got to be trumpeted and triumphed. And that's why I love that this film is coming out with Tyler Perry and Netflix. So we're really proud of that. But how many more stories, to your point, are languishing on the cutting room floor? Are somebody said, well, I was just you fill in the blank, whatever profession they were. I was only, and I'm over it. Men and women alike. How do we inspire the next generation of young Americans to understand what service is to this country and why we're willing to die for this country? If you don't have a sense of who came before and was willing to do it, like Charity Adams, a Black woman in the 1940s, she served her country. And I like to say, when her country did not serve her, she still raised her hand, said, I will swear to defend this Constitution with my life if need be. So who am I to say, I don't need to serve? Yeah, we do. We all need to find a way, whether it's just in our local community and helping a homeless person. Just, you don't even have to give them anything except a smile and look them in the eyes and say hi. Treat them like a human being. Don't look away and act like you're too good for them. I think that's what this is really all about, that sense of community and sense of service.
I mean, the sense of community is only parlayed by the inspiration that comes from us sharing our own individual stories. When I hear stories about what we're talking about here today, I get inspired. And I understand that there's a quick switch between humility and being perceived as being braggadocious, I guess you would say, for saying, I did this and this is my story. Often, I'm guessing when you go through the military, they say, you perform your role. We do our duty. We do exactly what we're told to do. And that's not worth sharing. But I think in this world of social media and even being able to document this type of conversation, there is so much inspiration that comes from just hearing the story of these individuals that overcame such challenges that it invigorates you to have a feeling of resiliency and knowing that you can overcome things because they did as well. And I feel like that's where the true value comes from.
It's really like it's group therapy here, isn't it?
Exactly.
You know, I mean, you're like, oh, okay, so he did that and he survived it and he's, and yes, we all have bad days. This idea that it's, ice cream and butterflies and rainbows every day is ridiculous. Life is meant to be hard sometimes, but you have to know that there will be a softer landing along the way. And then it gets hard again. And then it gets a little softer. I just lost my dad a couple of weeks ago. And it's like, there's times when I'm doing great. And there's other times, like I just got off the phone with my mom and she's not doing so well today for it. But they were married for 65 years. And so now she's wandering in a house by herself. And it's not so great today, but it'll be better tomorrow. She'll have a better day. One of us 5 kids will give her a call and cheer her up, and we'll taking care of each other along the way. And I think that's really what we need to do as a people. Take care of each other. Look at each other. You don't know that you telling somebody, hey, I like your shirt today, or you smell good, or, something that puts a smile back on their face, makes their eyes brighten up a little bit again. It's painless to do. And why do we hold back on just being human to other humans?
And I think right now, at the time of recording this, right, we just had the announcement of our new president-elect. The last couple months have been very divisive in our communities. It's either your side versus our side, left versus right. And realistically, more so now than ever, I feel like we need to come together. I had an amazing guest on the podcast. There's a guy named Dr. Robert Kelly, and he came onto the show. And we talked about a really interesting example of human connection, how it can save lives. And this is a little bit heavier, so I hope everybody's okay with me sharing this story. But there was an individual who unfortunately died by suicide by jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge. This individual unfortunately washed up to the shore. Police officers took this individual's body, went back to his hotel or to his apartment because they checked his ID, and they found that he left a note that said, "Today is the day in which I'm no longer going to be with you. But one thing will stop me from going through with what I have planned. I'm going to take my 3-mile walk from my apartment to the bridge. If a single person looks at me in the eyes and smiles at me, I'm not going to do it. But if you come back and find this letter, you recognize that not a single person looked at me or addressed me on my way to doing what I'm doing." The small little nuances of just coming together and being a human being are the type of conversations that I feel like we need more so than ever. I don't know what your political affiliation is, Phyllis. I know that you had amazing lifetime of servitude, and I appreciate you for that. I know that you're also a caring mother. I know that you've done so many things that have been above and beyond yourself, and I appreciate you for the human being who you are and sitting in this conversation today. But we need to get closer to that humanistic connection of appreciation rather than all this division that we're dealing with today.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. And that's exactly the piece, where I live here in Northern Virginia. There's a lot of times there's somebody right there in the intersection, with a little sign looking for money. And most of the time I don't carry any cash. It's not so I don't give them money. It's just I have a debit card. I just don't think about it. But I still always look at them. I wave, I smile, I nod, I something, instead of everybody else that just sort of like, if they don't see me looking at them, they're still a human being. And whether you think they're fictitiously raising money that way, or they really, really, that's all they have left, it takes a lot of, I don't know if I would have it in me, even if I thought that was my last option, to go stand out there at an intersection with a sign and hope somebody would take pity on me and give me money. I do a lot of times, especially as it's getting to be winter, carry little Ziploc bags with like some wipes, like a $5 bill will be in there, some granola bars, things like that, and one of the small bottles of water, so that if I have them with me, I can help somebody out. You just never know what somebody else is going through, and that's a brilliant story about the Golden Gate Bridge and in 3 miles of walking. So you got to figure, if he was not walking at a fast pace, that's nearly an hour. Mm-hmm. The people passed him by, and not a single person could even glance his way. He was absolutely invisible, and that's a shame.
It is a shame. There's a couple things that are burning on the front of my mind right now. 37 years of service. Now we are the president of this organization. Okay. How did you make the personal transition from a career of servitude to now being the face, realistically, of an organization like this? Did you ever have any internal battles of imposter syndrome or an adjustment that you had to make for yourself? What was that like?
The whole time. And even while I was in the military, you can continue to get promoted along the way. And ultimately, now you're working in some really great positions in the Pentagon and traveling all across the globe to go visit soldiers and troops and families. And you're just trying, there were times early on that I always had to, like, I wouldn't eat before any speaking engagement. I was certain I was going to just barf. Worse than anything is like, my stomach was in such knots. I'm like, it's going to come out one end or the other. It was horrible. It was horrible because I felt like an imposter. Why am I the one up here talking about this? But because I do care, and people could clearly sense that, if they had an issue that their leadership within the military or, as a family concern that just nobody was really listening to, and it's like, suck it up, cupcake, you still got to go to work. Sometimes we need to be a little bit more mindful about when the challenge is really at the last straw. It's breaking somebody's back. Sometimes you just got to take a knee, is what we say in the military. You can keep driving on and keep marching and running. Sometimes you got to stop and put your knee down and say, I need a breather for a minute, either mentally and or physical. And I think that was one of the things that along the way I learned to embrace it, because I knew that I could make a difference for other people. So it's like, okay, put me in, coach, I'm ready to do this. And now that I'm quite comfortable after 5 years in this role as the president of a large foundation, we've got to raise over $5 million a year. And, we're not selling anything. We have to rely on people's generosity and their donations to keep this beautiful national memorial that Congress says we can't charge admission. Says it has to be open 7 days a week. It has to be illuminated out front, just like the Lincoln Memorial, every night of the week, illuminated, this big building. But they don't give us any money to pay that light bill or anything. So we have to ask America to help us. But learning these stories, I have 12 new ones on my desk. Every one of them talks about Thanksgiving. And with Thanksgiving coming up, that was important to me to sort of see these women as what they took the time in their memorable experiences that the word Thanksgiving is in there. And I thought, what were they giving thanks for? What did they see as that? And so it was really amazing to go through those 12 new stories that I had never seen before. But there's 320,000 and growing every day. I'll never get through all of them. But that's my goal, is to someday write some books about, a selection, a cross section of like 30, 40, 50 of them that have a theme, not necessarily Thanksgiving, but let's find a thematic that would make that kind of a book or whatever, that story sort of coalesce and help America to know what these women across nearly 250 years have done, because they love this country too.
Have Thanksgiving and military service ever brought you a story of connection that you might want to share with the audience?
Yes, that's the fun thing about it. And I didn't put it in my story, but I think I may go back into the database. The good thing is you can change the story that you have in our story cards. And in Thanksgiving of 2007, I was over in Iraq. And fortunately, in a way, one of my sons was also in Iraq, but over in Taji, and I was in Balad. So he was able to get a helicopter over to our location, my location. Went over and picked him up at where they landed and brought him over to my place. And he had joined in early 2004, March of '04. And ever since he joined, between all of his training and his assignments, he'd been in Korea, he'd been down at Fort Hood, now Fort Cavazos in Texas. This was the first time, as we sat there eating Thanksgiving dinner together, he said, "Mom, you know what? This is the first holiday meal I've had with somebody in my family since I joined the Army." And that was nearly 4 years. And I was sort of taken aback. So when we got up from the table, we hugged again. And I said, "Well, I'm glad you got to spend it with me." Not necessarily in Iraq, but it was fun. And that was the week that we also promoted him then to sergeant. So that was pretty cool. We were happy to have a few days to spend with us together in a combat zone. So yeah, that was a special Thanksgiving for us.
If you could go back to that young version of Phyllis who's just thinking about taking on this new 4-year commitment of military service, and you had 5 minutes of uninterrupted time with her, and you could hammer home any piece of advice on how she was going to navigate her career to meet us where we are here today, what would you tell her for her journey?
I don't think I'd change a thing. There's been pitfalls and I've stumbled along the way, and other people have stumbled as well. But just like the parking lot, hey, this is veteran parking. Some of these things that some people say, wow, why didn't you put him in his place? Why didn't you? To what end? I think it's taught me along the way patience and allowing other people some grace. And I think that's the main thing, is just keep leading with your heart. Don't be afraid to show people. Sometimes you're going to cry, sometimes with happiness, sometimes with sadness. But I think, along the way, as in that 37 years of playing Army, I also, some of those years was Army Reserve, which meant I was a full-time registered nurse on the civilian side. So I actually even very much enjoyed both geriatric nursing, med surg, cardiac, all of those. But hospice care was one of those that was really special to me. Not everybody's cut out to hold somebody's hand as they're dying. Apparently I am. I look at these people and think, I don't want them to be scared and I don't want them to be alone. And so what can I do? And when we cry with the family after that individual has passed away, it's okay. It means our heart is still pumping. We still have the capacity to care and feel for each other. And I'm like, I'll cry for my dad off and on, like I'm doing right now. He was an amazing man, a really great dad. So proud of me. Just bragged on me, because I was his only kid that went to the military, and then to make a full career of it and be inducted into a couple of military Hall of Fames and things like that. He and my mom, very proud of me. And so I wouldn't change anything. There were pitfalls, and I've got scraped knees metaphorically along the way for it. But yeah, I do it all over exactly the same way.
I just want to pause and kind of let that moment set in a little bit, because the passion that you have for not only your family, but for the people who came before you, the men and women who are going to come after you, and the stories that you're inspiring by just having this conversation today, Phyllis, is absolutely phenomenal. And I know that your father had amazing accomplishments, but his daughter's not very far behind. She represents a movement, a mission, and an ability to tell stories for people who need their story told. And I feel like that is why even forums like this podcast are so beautiful, because if you're watching or if you're listening today, you can see how important this is to you, Phyllis. And it makes me emotional in just recognizing how much passion and time you've given to so many others other than yourself. And it's just such an honor to be able to have you on the show. I can't thank you enough for coming and joining us.
Well, it's been my pleasure. I love sharing these stories. And yes, it does touch me because I am that passionate about it. I cannot believe that nearly all of my life, I did not know these incredible men and women's stories. So, I don't do it simply to, champion the women, because we are a very small percentage of the military. And there are so many men, humble men, that have served and fought and carried their own demons as a part of this military, that they also say, I was just doing my job. What a fantastic job, and what a great opportunity this country gives us to do that kind of a job, to try to safeguard and keep the demons at bay for the rest of America that is blissfully ignorant of what we do to keep them safe. But they should not be blissfully ignorant of the names and the stories of the human beings that have done that work for them.
So, Phyllis, what are the next 5 years of your leadership going to look like with this amazing organization? What are some of the things that you're focusing on, and what's the future going to look like, and how we can share these stories?
Here it is. It's less than 2 years away from America's 250th birthday. So we're getting ready to really celebrate and highlight that here at the Military Women's Memorial. We're at the entrance to Arlington National Cemetery. And if you look towards Washington, D.C., there's nothing between us and the Lincoln Memorial. So the 4th of July, 2026 is going to be a fantastic. We're sitting in the seat of one of the best vantage and viewpoints to watch the fireworks in the nation's capital for our 250th birthday. So we're looking forward to that. But the very next year is our 30th anniversary. And what we're planning to do, provided we finish raising the capital we need, is to actually gut the entire inside museum in the next 2 years and install all new high technology RFID multimedia platforms that are going to tell these 3 million plus stories in a whole new way that will capture the imagination of our young Americans and all of our visitors from around the world to come and see these incredible stories told in a whole new methodology that, well, we can only tell inside of the memorial right now 1/1000th of the story. And we think we can probably tell at least 50% of the stories on an annualized basis, and then rotate faster because of the technology that we'll have. And so we're really looking forward. When we opened in 1997, which will be a 30-year spread, out front of the memorial, there was over 40,000 men and women standing there to watch this place be dedicated and the doors opened. Many of those were World War II women. 2 of them were World War I women, over 100 years of age, that were there that day. And one of them said, when I served in the Navy in 1918, when I served in the Navy, women were not even allowed to vote. And she raised her right hand, swore that oath to the Constitution, and served. And that day in 97, she met Lieutenant Colonel Eileen Collins, a space shuttle commander.
Oh my gosh.
In her lifetime, she went from I couldn't vote, but I still managed to snake my way into the Navy in World War I, to meeting a woman that has commanded a space shuttle. That's fascinating. So the 30-year spread from when we open our doors until we do this renovation and ideally host the summer of 2027 an even bigger rededication ceremony, more than 40,000 people out front. We won't have any World War I women. we may still have, there still are World War II women alive. So we'll have them all the way to these young women that are serving today, and even their daughters and granddaughters and grandsons outside there to witness the rededication of this incredible place that helps to tell the stories of these incredible women. So once that is done, that's 3 years from now. That gives me 2 years to actually enjoy all of this without trying to raise millions of dollars to do the renovation, as well as millions of dollars just to run the place. So I only have to raise millions to run it and not to renovate it, at least for a while. So I want to do that for a year or two, and then a lot more traveling for myself. I want to see, I've seen a lot of the world, but I want to see it on my schedule, be in Venice, Italy for 2 or 3 weeks and not just 2 or 3 days, that kind of a thing.
I can only imagine how impactful 3 million more stories would be on top of the Phyllis Wilson story. I mean, just thinking about how impactful this has been for me today and everybody else who's watching and listening, it's easy to understand, Phyllis, how you are the definition of heart and hustle. Seriously, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
And that's a wrap.